Welcome to Backstage with Emerald City Music. My name's Sean McLean. I'm the host of Classical King FM's live and evening shows in Seattle. And we're very proud to be the media sponsor for Emerald City Music, who are tonight launching Reverie, the April program. And it's full of green shoots and sultry flowers and the kind of music that works really well for harp with French composers like Debussy and Saint-Saëns. So your privilege, as well as mine, is to get to speak with these featured artists who seem to have a monopoly on Avery Fisher career grants, among other things, starting with your artistic director of Emerald City Music, violinist Kristen Lee. Hello, Kristen.
Hi, Sean. Great to see you again.
Nice to see you again. And violinist Paul Neubauer, two-time Grammy nominee, Chicago Symphony debut under some of my heroes like Riccardo Muti, Mariinsky Orchestra under Valery Gergiev, gave the US premiere of the newly discovered Shostakovich viola piece, and was already principal violist of New York Philharmonic when he was 21. Nice to see you, Paul Neubauer.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Flutist Tara Helen O'Connor is another Avery Fisher Career Grant winner, teaches at Bard Conservatory, Manhattan School of Music, Purchase College, and has these legendary flute seminars over the summer at Banff. Nice to see you, Tara.
So great to be here. Nice to see you, Sean. Thanks for having us.
Harpist is Bridgette Kibby, a frequent guest on the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, who's collaborated with people you hear on King FM all the time, Dawn Upshaw, Placido Domingo, and one of my personal favorites, the mandolinist Avi Avital. Bridgette, we'll have to just geek out about Avi after this, okay?
Looking
You
forward
okay
to
with
that.
that?
Thanks so much for having us. Absolutely.
Great. So to start off, so this beautiful program tonight, I'll start with you, our flutist, Tara. It is a French program, but first a little kickoff with Beethoven. And it's one of the more unscowling pieces of Beethoven, his serenade for flute and violin and viola. I'm wondering if the light spirit is why it was not only popular in Beethoven's day, but actually brought in some income for the young composer. Can you tell us a little about this piece?
Sure. Well, it's funny because not a lot is known about the piece, but we do know that he wrote it just after the premiere, I think, of his first symphony and two successful premieres of his first and second piano concertos. And just to put it in perspective, in the chamber music repertoire, he had just finished the Opus 18 string quartets. So it was thought that he wrote this piece actually for his publisher to get some more business. And he got a lot of business. We're still getting a lot of mileage out of it. Beethoven only wrote one other serenade for strings. Actually, it's Opus 8. And then this Opus 25 is much later. And we don't know why he returned to it, except for the fact that maybe it was for this combination of instruments and also just for the publisher. And flute, of course, was very popular, probably since the days of Frederick the Great, right? Because, I mean, everybody played the flute. It's a very gentlemanly instrument to play. So it's a delightful, delightful piece. And it's one of the only chamber work that I know of actually by Beethoven that has flute in it with strings. And it's the combination is really, you think, oh, it's like two trebles and then viola, which is sort of in between, like it's got the high and the low, but it really is a very rich, beautiful texture. It's beautiful.
He had a little practice, the septet, which was also pretty popular and an income generator for him as well.
Right, and right around the same time, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul, as the violist, are there particular challenges or things to listen out for you? What's significant about it for you as a violist?
Well, as Tara said about the bass, the viola in this case is the bass, which is not the usual place for the viola because we're in the middle of the texture. So we're approaching this thinking about, well, should I bring out part of this try to play in a richer, more bass-like way? So you're thinking as a violist about the bass quality. You're thinking, of course, about where this is in Beethoven's output. It's an early work, and there's a lightness to it. It's a serenade, so it's supposed to be light music, yet there's pure Beethoven surprises, and there's humor, and we want to bring out that humor. And I guess perhaps, I don't know if my colleagues will agree with me, but for me, the most amusing spot is, I think, in the fourth movement. At the end of the fourth movement, we've done all these nice variations and everything's getting very quiet at the end, and then all of a sudden the violin and viola go boom, and it's over. And why did Beethoven do that? Because Beethoven quite often in his music has forzandos, like lots of loud things, and in all of his music, that's his signature. That's part of his signature, his surprises. So not only do we get the surprise from this last note, but we get his signature surprise, but we also get humor. So he wanted to make this very light and humorful. Like, I think right after that surprise, we have this movement that goes and it's like, what was the guy thinking about? And all I can say is that whenever we play it, we're always amused by the sort of, I don't know, ludicrous, maybe that's a little strong, but his kind of humor is coming out very abundantly in this piece. So that's, I think, what we're thinking about. And of course, playing together and all the normal things of chamber music work, where we want to make things blend and play in tune and all the little details so that the audience really enjoys the piece. So they don't have to worry about those things that we worry about. So they can just listen to the music, enjoy it, enjoy the humor of Beethoven.
Ludicrous, I don't think it's too strong a word. This is, after all, the guy who in his Ninth Symphony declares on a giant chord, "For God, for God, for God." Big silence, and what does he do? Fart with a contrabassoon immediately afterwards, right? I mean, this guy is being unpredictable, if anything, is what's predictable about him, right? Yeah. But a question, Paul, about the humor. It can be tough for us, centuries later, to know the jokes, right? So jokes like the one you described are obvious, but do you physically, with your facial expressions or your body movements, try to indicate this here's a joke in Beethoven's day?
Sometimes it's called for. It also depends on the group you're in. Some people will want to highlight that part of any composer. And as far as the humor of Beethoven's time, it's like any work from back then, trying to listen to it with ears of that you've never heard anything after that. That's what I like to be thinking about, is like, imagine you're in Beethoven's time, you're hearing this for the first time, you haven't heard any Schoenberg or any contemporary music or anything like, you haven't, no pop music, nothing like that. This is popular music. It's obviously there's other folk music happening at the time of Beethoven, but this is sort of popular classical music, and there's humor there. It's like Paul Hindemith, for instance, another German composer, and we think of Hindemith as very austere. No, that's really not the case. There's so much humor in Hindemith that it's his kind of humor. Do we think it's funny today? It's each his own, but we have to appreciate Beethoven's humor, Hindemith's humor, and what they're trying to get across to us. That's part of our job, is to sell these pieces. We are salespeople for these composers, and so we're taking this piece of Beethoven saying, this is the greatest piece ever written, no matter how we feel about it. And as it happens, we all love the piece, so it's pretty easy to sell it. But that's always the case with all of us, that any piece we play, we want to say this is the greatest piece you've ever heard, and we're trying to bring out anything that will make that happen for the audience.
Well, I mean, I love what you said about listening as if no music was written afterwards. That's a great reminder. Bridgette, as the harpist, you get to play music from a composer who is very comfortable with having a note for everything. As a pianist, a keyboardist, Saint-Saëns, he was not only an amazing pianist, but Franz Liszt called him the greatest organist alive in his day, right? Super popular guy. The harp, people who write easily for the piano do find that writing for the harp is very idiomatic, even though there isn't a string for every note on the harp you play today. So Saint-Saëns, this is late for him, and by this point, he wasn't so much in anymore. In fact, it's funny to read this, what I would call an oxymoron. He was conservatively romantic, um, as opposed to Debussy, right? To be romantic is never to be conservative, as far as I'm concerned. But by the time he wrote this piece, you know, Debussy had come along and was doing crazy things with harmony that Saint-Saëns didn't like. So when you play this, you know, Paul just talked about playing as if there's no piece to come afterwards. You're playing a piece of music that's kind of looking backwards, aren't you?
Yes, I think in terms of his inspiration in the past, you see the color palette of the great French masters, you know, his contemporaries. And I think that's what really dictates the context for me. He's creating a fantasy that has, you know, this charming element that maybe is more passé to the contemporary view. But in terms of the build upon a color palette, there's nothing quite like it. This piece to me is one of the most intimate and also the most audacious and outlandish and loud. So you have this full spectrum of dynamics and colors where the violin and harp can really match each other's sonority to the most intimate light detail. And then, of course, he does look back to almost Italian Baroque. He actually wrote the piece when he was on vacation in Italy at the time. And so my favorite part of the piece is actually this bass ostinato where the harp is just, you know, kind of the guitarist, the lutist, creating this amazing bass line. And then the violin just
is
shreds.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
it's almost like it's improvisation that's written out. So to me, it's like he is referencing these different points in history, but it's definitely his charming signature and the way he's able to kind of weave together these disparate sections in a way that makes sense to the ear is just a wonderful composer. So it's really a treat for us harpists to have this piece.
Sometimes the violin decides to leave the standard violin role and play harp-like things on the violin with you, right? So you get little moments where it's almost like two harps. I mean, nobody's fooled by it. A violin is not a harp, but still it's fun that he doesn't just assign that role of the violin to being melodic against your accompaniment. You mentioned loudness, Bridgette. Loudness and harp are not two words that go together very often.
Well, I think the harp is really capable of so much resonance and sound. And I think it's really a composer that builds a phrase and asks for it. I think in both the Debussy and the Saint-Saëns, you'll hear a lot of moments where Paul was alluding to the fact that he takes on the role of the bass in a sense. And I think the bass of the harp really gets to shine as a continuo in this, you know, piece with Kristen. Really, I'm almost like her cloud of support that goes from delicacy to richness, depending on what the violin is doing. And I think that's just so satisfying to play. So yes, I think there's a real gradation in the piece.
Well, we've been speaking about your role, Kristen. Here, you do start off with the standard violin role of being the melody against the harp, and then you get to have more interesting interactions. Since harpists can't bow their strings, but you can pluck yours, you've got one more color, I suppose, you can add. First of all, I just want to say how clever your programming is here, because you've programmed this in such a way that each one of the players gets to rest during somebody else's piece, right? You've thought about the comfort of all the players, so nobody is playing for too long.
Exactly.
But what are you looking forward to in this Saint-Saëns piece with Bridgette?
Yeah, I had the great fortune to play this piece with Bridgette a couple of times, multiple times, but it's been a few years since the last time we played it. So it was really great to revisit it after a number of years. What I love the most about collaborating with the harp is just the sheer colors that the harp is able to convey and bring out, and the range of colors and the sound and the dynamics. I think that's one of the greatest things, but also I think one of the greatest challenges in playing with the harp. I think collaborating with the harp itself is already very difficult in trying to bring out as much of a palette in those colors, but in this particular piece even more so, because Saint-Saëns, titling it The Fantasy, it really goes from one place to another. It really starts out with this very dreamy, just sort of like little outburst or something like that from the violin, and then it goes into this journey of like long phrases, and then to this more mischievous or a little bit more colorful, like virtuosic moments. And then it goes into this very dramatic thing. So it really just has this huge range of different characters that it's also trying to say. So I think just trying to bring that out, I think is the biggest goal and the challenge, but also the reason why it makes it such a wonderful piece. I think also I have to say the stamina in this work is very difficult. A lot of the times, well, I guess it's not always the case, but Saint-Saëns, the way he wrote it, we're playing all the time, and there are a lot of notes and there are a lot of things that are just constantly happening without much of a break. So the stamina is very, very challenging in this work, but very worthwhile, because after you go through this whole dream, and then when you get to this end, it's the most glorious, satisfying feeling when it finishes. So I can't wait for everybody to hear the piece.
I have an ensemble and timing question. An instrument like yours, you pull the bow across the string, the sound has this envelope that comes on a little bit slowly. The harp, you pluck, so you get this very decisive attack. Do you find that it's challenging to get your timing right, landing on the same note together?
I don't know, Bridgette, what do you think? I feel like if I focus so much on that itself, it'll actually do the counter thing, because if I focus too much on like the accuracy of like playing together, I don't think it'll feel so organic. What I do find in terms of just like blending of the sound that I find challenging, because I'm always sustained and I'm used to just like fuller sounds, and like you said, Sean, like when the sound sort of dissipates a little bit quicker, I have to make sure to not make myself feel so exposed or something. Like I have to sort of be in a different mindset, because I'm so used to the sound always being like hugged by the other.
Are you saying that you diminuendo after you play a note when you're playing with the harp, so we can hear the harp's decay? Is that what you're saying?
It's more of a mental thing, I think. Yeah, so I think, yes, sometimes I would let it decay. Sometimes I would let it continue and pass through, but it's just mentally, I have to just remember that, like, oh, my sound being so...
It's okay.
Like,
it's okay for you to...
Yeah. Exactly. I just have to be in the mindset that's a little bit different. Yeah.
I think we can give props to Saint-Saëns, because why he's an amazing craftsman is that it's all in the music.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't think about these things. We just play together. We just listen to the phrase, and the phrase dies down, but the way the harp decays is reflected in where the violin is at the time of the phrase. He built it all in. So if we're just listening to the phrases unfold, it's just all there because the score is so wonderful. So I think we're not actually getting, like Kristen was saying, we don't really think about, are we together, the idiomatic differences in our instruments. We're just listening to the line unfold, and he does the work for us if we do what's on the page. So that's what's so great about it, I think.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Back to you, Paul, as the violist. The final work on the program is something Debussy wrote from a series of sonatas he thought he was going to finish, but unfortunately he died after getting only 3 of them done. From Debussy, we have his violin sonata, we have his cello sonata, and the flute, viola, and harp sonata, which you're going to be playing. He was planning on projecting a whole cycle that was going to bring a bunch of instruments together. So too bad we didn't get those, but at least he wrote the piece where you're involved. And now it's a combination of instruments. He was sort of the first to really put it out there with anything like a big name, right? Now it's a combination people love. Do you remember what it was like the first time you played it, thinking about the colors?
I was talking about this in our rehearsals, because I have a very strong memory of playing this piece for the first time at a festival, I think maybe in Connecticut, with my colleagues Ransom Wilson, the flutist, and Nancy Allen, the harpist. This is going many, many, many years back, and they had played it a billion times together. And I'd never played it. I'd always wanted to play it because it's such a iconic work. And we didn't have much time to rehearse. That's all I'm going to say. And so it sticks in my mind about how I wanted to really dive into this piece, but we couldn't because of the time constraints. So that's sort of my first memory of playing the piece. But since then, I've played it with Ransom and Nancy dozens and dozens of times, and with various other colleagues. And Tara and Bridgette and I have played it before. A few years ago, we performed it. So, of course, every performance is different. Even with the three of us, the performance changes every time. And with different colleagues, it always changes. And that's one of the beautiful things about performing, is that they're always different. All these performances are different from one day to the next, even in the same day. There's so many variables involved. And that's part of the joy of listening to a live performance, is that you get these subtleties that you're not going to, if you listen to a recording that may have been made perfect through various means, that can be wonderful in its way, but somehow the live performance aspect is something that is very special. And of course, we love doing it. And this piece, I mean, it has everything. The colors from the very first bars, the colors are just like, whoa, what is this guy thinking?
Well, let's talk about the color for a second, because originally your part was for oboe. That's what he was thinking. And I'm wondering, eventually Debussy decided that the viola would be a much better match with those two other instruments. But what I'm wondering is, I don't know how much of it he composed with oboe in mind first. Do you see breath spacings? Because violas don't have to worry about breathing, right? So do you actually see in his phrasings, a composer who was thinking in terms of breath?
Of course I know that he meant it for the oboe, but it doesn't, all I see is a viola piece at this point, honestly. So I'm thinking about what you're saying. Composers like this, we're always thinking about the breathing. That's part of what we do. We're trying to make a piece feel natural, that a phrase makes sense. And so part of that is breathing. And it's like when we talk, we have something goes up and goes down, and we head in this direction. It's the same thing when we're playing. It all has to make sense. And you may say, oh, but why does that matter? It matters to the audience, because if you're listening, you don't have to know every little detail about what we're thinking about. But if it sounds, if you feel as you're listening to something doesn't feel right, or it feels uncomfortable, it doesn't seem to make sense, then there's a problem. So we don't want that for the audience. We want the audience just to sit there and say, oh, that's beautiful music. It seems to make sense. And so that's all these little details that we're agonizing over. And I assure you, we agonize over all this stuff all the time. But
at least it's a conspiracy. At least you're breathing together.
Yeah, we're breathing together. We want the audience to feel like whatever they're listening to makes sense.
Yeah.
So
and
that's
Tara,
what it comes to. Yeah.
For you, very fun part for Debussy and flute, what about for you for this piece, the joys and things to listen out for?
Well, this piece to me is one of my favorite pieces of all time. And when you say oboe, I just can't even get that in my ear. I mean, I really just can't. And I think because this piece is the choice of instruments and the blending that happens between the three is probably the most one of the most stunning aspects of this composition. Like how for instance, at the very opening, when the harp starts, how the flute comes out of that sound, how melody is transformed in color by adding and subtracting instruments. And Debussy is like a master at this. He's so specific.
Can I interrupt and say that as a fan of Wagner early in his life, he wasn't later, but as a fan of Wagner early in his life, he did pick up that technique from Wagner, what the Germans call Klangfarbenmelodie, right? The passing of a melody through a group of instruments such that you say, wait, when did the bassoon let that go and the horn take it up? I didn't even hear when that happened, right?
Right, exactly. So for when I was studying this in school, because when you go to college, you spend like a semester on these things, and when you get into the professional world, you spend like 2 days or 3 days, right? It's a very different learning experience, but you bring the breadth of all of your knowledge of many years to that situation. So that's a beautiful thing about the cumulative knowledge of your process, right? But what to me, I think what is just so astounding is that the way that the craft, right, as you were saying, the craft that happens in this composition, and how you're a flarp, and then you're like a flyolin. Like my teacher would have all these names for the combinations of instruments, so I always think about that when I'm playing this piece. Another really spectacular thing about it is he really knows which registers work the best for everything. So the colors are always perfect. The layers of the rhythms, while they're thick, they're completely and utterly transparent, and that is also just such a joy. So when you play a piece like this, or even the Beethoven, you always want to just dig deeper. It's, like Paul said, you play these pieces 100 times in your millions of times in your life, whatever, but each experience is different and unique, and everybody's sound is different, right? So you find new ways to get in, which of course change your chamber music skills and heighten your hearing. But it also makes the whole process just so satisfying. I really just beautifully satisfying. And the other thing that I love about WC is people think French music, oh, do what you want, whatever. But my teacher, Tom Neifinger, one of my teachers, said WC had wished he were German because then people would have paid attention to what he wrote. And he was said to have said that. So, woo, right? French music, pay attention to what's
Pay
on
attention. He didn't write that for nothing on the page. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
In the remaining 3 minutes we have, Bridgette, I'm going to have you answer this and hand over to Kristen here. I have two questions. One is, we've been talking about breathing together. It looks like, before 2022, we'll be doing that again in the same room. Do you think virtual concerts will continue? And then we'll finish off with Kristen, who can tell us about next season. So Bridgette first.
I'll be super quick and just say, I imagine a hybrid world, because I think there's nothing like a live audience. They're the unspoken final member of the chamber ensemble that lends energy to a space. And I miss the live resonance of a sacred space that's meant for chamber music. Tara's talking about these intricacies, and there's nothing like playing that at a hall that's meant for that, with an audience and that heightened listening. So, but I also think it's kind of exciting in this time that audiences have accessed artists, and we've accessed audience members in a very intimate way. And in these videos, you can really see and feel up close how an artist is executing a phrase. And I think there's something very exciting about that too. So I think both have their place.
Great. Kristen.
Yes, I'm so glad you said all of that, Bridgette, because I can't agree more. And with Emerald City Music, we are going to be pursuing that model for this upcoming season. So in the fall, we are going back live, which is extremely exciting because we have missed our friends and our wonderful fans of Emerald City Music so much. So we're very, very excited to be getting back into our hall. But like Bridgette said, I think there is something that we all learned here and we really valued about the virtual thing. And I think for us, one of the greatest thing was that we were able to make new friends from all over the world. The beautiful thing about the virtual world is that you can connect wherever you are. And so we're very excited that we can continue that virtual model to bring our performances and the name of Emerald City Music to everywhere. So I hope that everyone will get a chance to join us for the next season. We have a lot of really, really exciting things that we're going to announce fairly soon. So I hope that you will continue to support us and also join us in the next season.
And if you don't have your tickets to get to the performance for tonight, just visit emeraldcitymusic.org. You can get your tickets for just $20. This premiere tonight will actually still be available until May 22nd. So just spread the word, share with your friends, and you're in for a very special program tonight called Reverie. Thank you all for joining me today. What a pleasure to hear from you all, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Sean. Bye.